The first thing you notice when you wake in a medieval castle is the cold. A bone-deep chill that seeps through stone walls 3 feet thick, through woolen blankets and fur coverings, through the very air itself, settling into your lungs with each breath you take in the darkness before dawn. It is March in the year 1374, and you are waking inside Thornbury Keep, a modest but well-maintained castle in the northern reaches of England. The keep rises 4 stories above the curtain walls, its grey stone tower a statement of strength and permanence in a landscape of wooden villages and thatched roofs. You are not the lord of this castle. That is Sir Edmund Blackwell, a knight of middling rank who holds these lands from the Earl of Northwood. You are a member of the household, one of perhaps 80 souls who live within these walls, and your day is about to begin in the way it has begun every day for the past 3 years, with the tolling of the chapel bell for Lords, the first prayer service of the monastic hours that structure castle life, as surely as the stone structures the building itself. Before we continue, if you'd like to join me for more stories like this, feel free to subscribe. I share a new one every day. And if you don't mind, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The bell's sound echoes through the castle, a bronze voice calling the faithful to prayer. You lie still for a moment, reluctant to leave the relative warmth of your bed. You sleep in the great hall, as do most of the household servants and retainers. Your bed is a straw mattress on a wooden platform along the wall, separated from your neighbors by only a few feet. Privacy is a luxury reserved for the lord and lady who sleep in the sola, the private chamber on the top floor of the keep. Around you, others are stirring. You hear the rustle of straw, the creak of wood, the low murmurs of people greeting the day with something less than enthusiasm. Someone coughs, a wet rattling sound that has persisted for weeks. Winter illnesses linger in the castle, passed from person to person in the close quarters where everyone lives and works. You swing your legs out of bed, your feet finding the cold stone floor. You sleep in your undergarments, a long linen shirt that reaches to your knees, because removing and donning all your clothing in the dark and cold would be unbearable. Now you pull on your woolen hose, tying them to your braids with practiced efficiency. Your tunic comes next, a sturdy garment of undyed wool that has been mended several times. Over this goes your cothardie, a closer-fitting outer garment that buttons up the front. Finally, your leather shoes, worn but serviceable. The great hall is beginning to come alive around you. Servants are rolling up pallets and stacking them against the walls to clear space for the day's activities. The fire in the great hearth has burned down to embers during the night, and young Thomas, the firekeeper's boy, is already at work, coaxing it back to life, adding kindling and small logs blowing gently to encourage the flames. You make your way toward the garderobe, the latrine built into the thickness of the castle wall. There is a line, as there always is in the early morning. You wait your turn, stamping your feet against the cold. When you finally enter the small chamber, you find the familiar wooden seat with its hole opening to a shaft that drops down to a cesspit far below. The smell is unpleasant but tolerable. Lime is regularly added to the pit to control the odor, and the shaft is designed to catch wind that helps carry fumes away. Emerging from the garderobe, you join the stream of people making their way to the chapel for lauds. The chapel is a small room on the 2nd floor of the keep, barely large enough to hold the household. Sir Edmund maintains a chaplain, Father Oswald, an elderly priest who has served the Blackwell family for 30 years. He stands at the small altar now, already dressed in his vestments, waiting for the household to assemble. The service is conducted in Latin, which you understand only imperfectly. Father Oswald's voice is thin with age, but steady as he leads the prayers and psalms. You stand, there are no pews or benches, and you bow your head at the appropriate moments, cross yourself when others do, murmur Amen when the prayers conclude. The ritual is comforting in its familiarity, a constant in a world where so much is uncertain. After lauds comes the breaking of the fast, though breakfast as such is not recognized as a formal meal. In the great hall, servants have set out bread and ale on the long tables. The bread is yesterday's, slightly stale but still edible. The ale is small beer, weak enough to drink throughout the day without becoming intoxicated. You take a chunk of bread and a cup of ale, finding a place at one of the lower tables. The hierarchy of the castle is reflected in everything, including where you sit and what you eat. At the high table on the dais at the far end of the hall, Sir Edmund and Lady Eleanor will take their breakfast when they take it with white bread, butter, perhaps some cold meat from last night's supper. At the tables in the main hall, the household arranges itself by rank. Senior household officers closest to the high table, skilled craftsmen and retainers in the middle, servants and laborers at the far end. You occupy a middle position in this hierarchy. You are a clerk responsible for helping maintain the household accounts, drafting letters and keeping records. It is a position of some responsibility, requiring education that most people lack. You can read and write in both Latin and English, cipher numbers, and compose documents in the proper forms. This makes you valuable to Sir Edmund, who himself can read, but whose writing is laborious and whose Latin is uncertain. As you eat your bread and drink your ale, conversation flows around you. Much of it is mundane, complaints about the cold, speculation about when spring will truly arrive, gossip about people in the household. But some of it is more serious. There is talk of the war with France, which has been going on for decades and shows no signs of ending. There is talk of taxes. The king always needs more money for his campaigns, and those taxes fall heavily on the landed classes, who in turn extract them from their tenants and laborers. There is talk of the pestilence which swept through the region 2 years ago and might return at any time. This last topic makes everyone uncomfortable. The Great Mortality, as some call it, the pestilence that first arrived in 1348 and has returned several times since, has touched nearly every family in England. Sir Edmund lost his first wife and 2 of his 3 children to it. Half the villages on his lands are partially or wholly abandoned. The castle household itself is smaller than it was before the pestilence. There simply aren't enough people to fill all the positions that once existed. But dwelling on such matters serves no purpose, so the conversation moves on. Someone mentions that the mill in the nearby village needs repairs. Someone else notes that the fish in the castle pond seem to be thriving and might be ready for harvesting soon. The marshal of the hall, the officer responsible for maintaining order during meals, reminds everyone that Sir Edmund expects all household members to be properly dressed and groomed, as visitors are expected later in the week. After breaking fast, the household disperses to begin the day's work. The castle is a complex organism that requires constant effort to maintain. Every person has their role, and the smooth functioning of the whole depends on everyone performing their duties. You make your way to the small chamber that serves as the estate office. It is on the 3rd floor of the keep, a room perhaps 10 feet square with a single narrow window that provides light. The room is furnished simply. A heavy wooden table that serves as a desk, a chair, a stool for visitors, a locked chest containing important documents, and shelves holding account rolls, letters, and other records. The fire in the small brazier has gone out overnight and the room is bitterly cold. You spend several minutes rekindling it, using a coal from the great hall fire that you carried up in a small iron pot. Once the brazier is burning, you arrange your materials. You unroll the current account book, a long parchment scroll on which you record the daily expenses and income of the household. You check the level of ink in your inkhorn and find it adequate. You examine your quills and select one that needs minimal trimming. Your first task this morning is to record yesterday's transactions. From memory and from notes, scratched on a wax tablet, you begin to write, in the careful script you learned from the monk who taught you letters. Item for 3 barrels of salt fish from the merchant William of York, 7 shillings and 4 pence. Item for repair of the mill wheel at Lower Thornbury, 2 shillings. Item for wages paid today, laborers working on the curtain wall, 18 pence. The work is meticulous and somewhat tedious, but you take pride in it. These records matter. They allow Sir Edmund to understand the state of his finances, to plan for future expenses, to identify theft or waste. In a world where most transactions are still conducted through custom and oral agreement, written records are a form of power. As you work, you hear the sounds of the castle awakening fully to the day. From somewhere below comes the clang of metal on metal, the smith at work in his forge in the outer bailey. You hear voices calling instructions. The the creak of the windlass as the well is operated, the clop of hooves on stone as horses are led from the stables. The castle is never truly quiet, except in the deepest hours of night. Around mid-morning, you are interrupted by a knock at the door. It is Hugh, the steward, the officer responsible for managing Sir Edmund's entire estate, including the castle household and all the outlying manors and farms. Hugh is a man in his 50s, competent and respected, who has served the Blackwell family since he was a boy. Sir Edmund wants a summary of last quarter's accounts, he says, without preamble. He has concerns about grain stores and wants to know if we have sufficient to last until the harvest. You nod. I can have it ready by this afternoon. Shall I bring it to him, or will you collect it? Bring it to the Solar after the dinner hour. He'll want to discuss it with you. After Hugh leaves, you set aside the daily accounts and turn to the larger task. You pull out the quarterly rolls and begin working through them, tallying grain purchases and distributions, calculating what should remain in the granary. The mathematics is complex. You must account not just for human consumption, but for seed grain that must be reserved for planting grain used to feed the castle's horses, and other livestock grain given as wages to some workers, and grain sold at market. As you work, you are conscious of the passage of time. In the castle, time is marked by the ringing of bells for the prayer services, lauds at dawn, prime in the early morning, terce at mid-morning, sext at midday, none in the mid-afternoon, vespers at evening, and compline before bed. Between these markers, time flows without precise measurement. There are no clocks in the castle. Such devices are rare and expensive, found only in great cathedrals and royal palaces. Instead, people estimate time by the position of the sun, the length of shadows, the feeling of hunger as mealtime approaches. The bell for sext rings, marking midday and the dinner hour, the main meal of the day. You set aside your work and make your way down to the great hall. The transformation from sleeping quarters to dining hall is complete. The trestle tables are set up and covered with cloths, plain linen for the lower tables, finer linen for the high table. Servants are bringing food from the kitchen, which is located in a separate building in the outer bailey to reduce the risk of fire. The meal is substantial. There is pottage, a thick stew of beans, onions, and root vegetables cooked with bones for flavor. There are loaves of bread, both the coarse maslin bread made from mixed grains that most people eat, and finer white bread for the high table. There is roasted mutton, a whole sheep that has been turning on a spit in the kitchen since early morning. There are fish, both fresh from the castle ponds and salted fish from the stores. Because this is Friday and the church forbids meat, there is cheese, hard and aged, and butter, and apples from the castle orchard stored since autumn in the Undercroft. The household assembles for dinner in order of rank. Sir Edmund and Lady Eleanor enter last, taking their places at the high table. Sir Edmund is a man in his 40s, of medium height but powerful build, his face weathered by years of warfare and outdoor life. Lady Eleanor is younger, his second wife, married 3 years ago after his first wife died in the pestilence. She is a careful manager of the household, attentive to detail, though some of the older servants resent her for replacing their beloved former mistress. Father Oswald says grace in Latin, and then the meal begins. Food is served from the kitchen in order of rank, the high table first, then working down through the household. You receive portions of pottage, bread, cheese, and fish. The fish is pike from the castle pond, bony but flavorful. You eat with your fingers and a knife, using bread as a plate, a trencher that will be given to the poor at the gate after the meal. Conversation during meals is permitted but expected to be moderate in volume and respectful in content. Around your table, people discuss the morning's work and the afternoon's tasks. The master mason, who is directing repairs to the curtain wall, complains about the quality of stone being delivered from the quarry. The head gardener worries about whether the winter has killed the herb garden. The huntsman reports seeing signs of wolves in the forest and suggests organizing a hunt to reduce their numbers. You eat steadily but not quickly. The meal is meant to last perhaps an hour, and eating too quickly would mark you as greedy or ill-mannered. You drink ale with your food. Everyone drinks ale at meals, from the lord to the lowest servant, because water is often unsafe and ale, having been boiled in its brewing, is safer. The ale is part of your wages. Each household member is entitled to a certain amount daily, with the amount varying by rank. After dinner, you return to your work on the grain accounts. The afternoon light through the narrow window is better than the morning light, making the work easier on your eyes. You calculate and recheck your figures, wanting to be certain before presenting them to Sir Edmund. By your reckoning, the castle stores contain sufficient grain to feed the household until the harvest, but with little margin for error. If the harvest is poor, or if the household must feed additional people, soldiers, visitors, workers on major projects, there could be shortages. The weeks that follow the visit settle back into routine. The repairs to the curtain wall continue, slow work that will take months to complete. The weather gradually warms as March gives way to April. The days lengthen noticeably, and the castle's rhythm shifts slightly. People rise earlier because dawn comes earlier, and they stay active later because daylight lasts longer. The agricultural year begins in earnest. In the villages on Sir Edmund's lands, peasants are ploughing fields and planting crops. The castle's own fields, the domain lands worked directly for the Lord's benefit, are also being prepared. You accompany Hugh the steward on an inspection tour of several villages, recording notes about which fields are being planted with what crops, which tenants are fulfilling their labor obligations, which properties need repairs. The tour takes several days and you sleep in different places each night. One night in a village priest's house, another night in a tenant farmer's cottage, a third night in a small manor house where Sir Edmund maintains a subordinate household. The accommodations vary in quality, but nowhere approaches the relative comfort of the castle. The houses are smaller, draftier, simpler. The food is coarser. The beds are harder. But the tour is instructive. You see how the estate actually functions, how the castle's prosperity depends on the labor of hundreds of peasants working the land. You see the complexities of the manorial system, how some peasants are free tenants who pay rent, while others are villains bound to the land and owing labor service. You see how custom and tradition govern every aspect of agricultural life, from when crops are planted to how common lands are shared. You also see the effects of the pestilence. In one village, an entire row of cottages stands abandoned, their thatched roofs collapsing, their gardens overgrown. Hugh points to them sadly. 20 families lived there before the great mortality, all dead or fled. The land they worked has been absorbed into other holdings, but we've never found enough people to rebuild the village to its former size. This is a common story. The population has still not recovered from the great dying that occurred a generation ago. There are simply fewer people to work the land, fewer people to pay rents and taxes, fewer people to maintain the complex social and economic structures of feudal society. The effects ripple through everything: labor shortages, abandoned lands, nobles with reduced incomes struggling to maintain their accustomed lifestyles. When you return to the castle after the tour, you spend several days organizing your notes into a formal report for Sir Edmund. The report details the state of each village, the condition of buildings and fields, any disputes or concerns that need the Lord's attention. It is tedious work, but important. These records help Sir Edmund govern his lands effectively. As April continues, the castle's attention turns to preparations for Easter, the most important festival of the Christian year. The chapel must be cleaned and decorated. Lady Eleanor organizes the household to produce special foods: sweetbreads, elaborate pies, preserved fruits brought out from winter storage. Additional ale is brewed. Arrangements are made for the poor to be fed at the castle gate on Easter Day, an act of charity expected of the nobility. Father Oswald becomes more active, hearing confessions from all household members, preparing them spiritually for Easter communion. You confess your sins, minor matters of impatience, pride in your work, uncharitable thoughts about others in the household. Father Oswald assigns a light penance, some prayers, and a small donation to the poor. The ritual is familiar and comforting, a reminder that despite the hardships of life, salvation is possible for all who seek it. Holy Week arrives, and the pace of castle life slows. On Maundy Thursday, Sir Edmund washes the feet of 12 poor men brought in from the villages, reenacting Christ's washing of the disciples' feet. It is a ceremony that reinforces the Lord's duty to those beneath him, though the symbolism is somewhat ironic, After the ceremony, the poor men are given a meal and sent away, returning to their poverty, while Sir Edmund returns to his comfortable life. Good Friday is a day of fasting and solemn prayer. The chapel services are long and somber, recounting Christ's suffering and death. The mood in the castle is subdued, even grim. People speak in whispers, avoid laughter, focus on contemplation of sin and mortality. But then comes Easter Sunday and everything transforms. The chapel is bright with candles and decorated with early spring flowers. Father Oswald's voice rings out with joy as he announces, "Christ is risen." The household responds, "He is risen indeed." The sorrow of Friday gives way to the celebration of Sunday, death to resurrection, despair to hope. The Easter feast is magnificent, the best meal of the entire year. There is roasted beef and lamb, fresh fish from the ponds, pies and puddings and sweetmeats. There is entertainment. A juggler who travels from castle to castle performing at great houses, a minstrel who sings songs of love and adventure, members of the household who perform simple plays depicting biblical stories. You eat and drink and enjoy the festival, the break from routine, the sense of communal celebration. For one day the hierarchies relax slightly, the burdens lighten, the future seems hopeful. It is a reminder that life is not only labor and duty, that there is also joy and beauty and fellowship. But the next day the routine resumes. The work continues. The castle returns to its normal rhythms. As April gives way to May, the weather finally turns warm. The last frosts end and spring arrives in full. The countryside around the castle explodes with life, trees leafing out, wildflowers blooming, birds nesting and singing. The castle's gardens, tended carefully by the gardener and his assistants, produce the first fresh vegetables, lettuce, onions, herbs. After months of preserved and stored foods, these fresh greens are welcome additions to meals. The castle itself undergoes spring cleaning. This is a massive undertaking that occupies much of the household for several weeks. Rushes that have covered the floors all winter, now filthy and flea-ridden, are removed and burned. The stone floors are scrubbed with water and lye. Fresh rushes mixed with herbs like lavender and rosemary are laid down. Tapestries are taken down, beaten to remove dust, and inspected for damage from moths. Bedding is aired. Every corner of the castle receives attention. You participate in this cleaning, though your role is relatively light compared to the servants who do the heavy labor. Your main task is to ensure the estate office is thoroughly cleaned and all documents are properly stored and protected. You go through every scroll and ledger, checking for signs of mold or insect damage, ensuring everything is properly labeled and filed. It is tedious work, but necessary. These records are irreplaceable. The mood in the castle becomes anxious. People watch each other for signs of illness, fever, swellings, unusual fatigue. Every cough or sneeze provokes worry. Conversation returns again and again to the pestilence, to memories of previous outbreaks, to fears about the future. But as the days pass and no new reports arrive, the fear gradually subsides. Perhaps the outbreak has been contained. Perhaps it was not the true pestilence, but some other disease. Perhaps God has heard the prayers and granted mercy. Life returns to normal, though a shadow remains. The knowledge that catastrophe is always possible, that security is illusory, that death can come at any time. July arrives, bringing the hottest weather of the year. The castle becomes uncomfortable during midday, despite the thick stone walls. People seek shade, drink more ale and water, move slowly to conserve energy. The chapel services are briefer than usual. Even Father Oswald acknowledges that prolonged standing in the heat is unreasonable. But July also brings the grain harvest, the most important agricultural event of the year. Everything depends on the grain harvest, the food supply for humans and animals, the seed for next year's planting, the surplus that can be sold to generate income. A good harvest means prosperity and security. A poor harvest means hunger and hardship. The harvest this year appears promising. The weather has been favorable. Enough rain in spring to establish the crops, but dry weather now allowing the grain to ripen properly. The fields show good yields. Sir Edmund is optimistic, and his optimism spreads through the household. The harvest is all-consuming for several weeks. Every available person works in the fields. Castle servants, villagers fulfilling labor obligations, hired workers brought in for the season. The grain must be cut, bound into sheaves, stacked to dry, threshed to separate grain from chaff, winnowed to clean the grain, and finally stored in barns and granaries. Even you are drawn into the harvest work, though not for the physical labor. You are stationed in the field to keep count of the sheaves as they are harvested, recording which portions of which fields have been cut, ensuring that the grain from the Lord's domain lands is kept separate from the grain that belongs to tenants. It is hot, dusty work, and you gain new appreciation for those who do such labor every day. The harvest proceeds smoothly. The weather holds. No rain to ruin cut grain left in the fields. No storms to flatten standing crops. The workers are sufficient in number, and the harvest is completed on schedule. When the final calculations are made, the yield is indeed good, better than the previous 2 years, sufficient to feed the household with surplus to sell. There is celebration when the harvest is complete. Sir Edmund hosts a harvest feast, serving all the workers, castle household, villagers, and hired laborers together, a meal of roasted meat, bread, and plenty of ale. It is a moment of relief and gratitude, acknowledgement that the most critical work of the year has been successfully completed. August brings a slower pace after the intensity of harvest. There is still work, repairs to buildings and equipment that were deferred during harvest, preparation of fields for fall planting, maintenance of the castle and grounds. But the urgency has passed, and people can breathe easier, knowing that food for the coming year is secured. You return to your normal duties, though with additional work related to the harvest. The grain must be carefully counted and recorded. The amounts owed to the Lord, the amounts reserved for seed, the amounts distributed as wages or payments, all must be calculated and documented. The surplus that will be sold must be identified, and arrangements made for its transport to market and sale. This work occupies you for several weeks. The mathematics is complex, and errors could be costly. You work carefully, double-checking your calculations, consulting with Hugh the steward to ensure your figures align with his expectations. When you finally present the completed harvest accounts to Sir Edmund, he reviews them with satisfaction. "A good year," he says, "the best in recent memory. If we can achieve such yields regularly, the estate will prosper." "God willing, my lord," you reply, because in agriculture human effort is never sufficient. Divine favor is always necessary. September brings cooler weather and the beginning of autumn. The leaves on the trees surrounding the castle begin to change color, creating a landscape of golds and reds and browns. The days shorten noticeably, and the castle begins to prepare for the approaching winter. The preparation involves many tasks. Firewood must be cut and stacked, enormous quantities of it, enough to keep the castle's fires burning through months of cold. The chimneys and flues must be cleaned to prevent fires. Shutters must be repaired or replaced. Gaps in walls must be filled. Supplies must be laid in, salt for preserving meat, candles and rushlights for the long dark nights, warm clothing and blankets, medicines and herbs that might be needed for winter illnesses. The livestock must also be prepared for winter. Cattle and sheep that cannot be fed through the winter are slaughtered and their meat preserved by salting, smoking, or storing in the cold undercrofts. The animals that will be kept through winter are moved to shelters and their winter feed is organized. The horses, the most valuable animals, essential for transportation, warfare, and prestige, receive special attention, with the best fodder reserved for them. You participate in the inventory work, recording what supplies have been laid in, calculating whether they will be sufficient, identifying what else must be purchased or produced. The work is familiar from previous years, but it never becomes routine. The calculations matter too much, and the consequences of error are too severe. In October, Sir Edmund must attend a council called by the Earl of Northwood. All the Earl's vassals have been summoned to discuss matters of mutual concern, defense, justice, taxation. Sir Edmund will be gone for perhaps 2 weeks, and in his absence, Lady Eleanor will manage the castle with Hugh the steward's assistance. Before departing, Sir Edmund meets with his senior household officers to give instructions. You are included in this meeting, representing the administrative functions of the estate. Sir Edmund's instructions are clear. Maintain normal operations, avoid any major decisions until his return, and send a messenger immediately if any emergency arises. The castle functions smoothly in Sir Edmund's absence. Lady Eleanor proves herself a capable manager, making decisions promptly and fairly. Hugh the steward handles the day-to-day operations of the estate. Life continues in its established patterns, but there is a slight change in atmosphere, a relaxation of formality perhaps, or a shift in the social dynamics when the Lord is not present. People speak more freely, laugh more easily, take slightly more liberty in their behavior. It is subtle but noticeable. During this time you have more direct interaction with Lady Eleanor than usual. She consults you about financial matters, seeking your advice on whether certain expenditures can be made or should be deferred. You find her intelligent and well-informed, with a good grasp of the estate's financial situation. She asks penetrating questions and listens carefully to your answers. One evening she asks you about the old account books, having heard that you examined them during the spring cleaning. What was different then? She asks. What did the records show about life before the pestilence? You describe what you found, the larger household, the greater expenses, the different economic patterns. You try to explain how the social and economic structures have changed, how the world of 20 years ago was in some ways fundamentally different from the present. Lady Eleanor listens intently, then says, I never knew that world. I was a child when the great mortality came. The world I remember is the world after, this world of fewer people and abandoned villages. Sometimes I wonder what was lost, what we might have had if the pestilence had never come. It is a moment of unusual candor, a glimpse behind the formal facade that the nobility must maintain. You respond carefully. What was lost was terrible, my lady. But what remains is not without value. The world continues. Life continues. That itself is something. She nods. Yes, we must work with the world as it is, not as it was, or as we wish it to be. That is wisdom, I think. Sir Edmund returns from the council in mid-October with mixed news. The Earl has demanded increased financial support for royal taxes and for the defense of the realm. All his vassals must contribute, and the amounts are substantial. But the council also resulted in agreements to cooperate on matters of justice and defense, which should benefit everyone. The increased financial demands mean belt-tightening at the castle. Sir Edmund calls a meeting of his household officers to discuss how to reduce expenses. Every area of spending is examined. Some planned purchases are deferred. Some positions that have been vacant will remain unfilled. Portions of meals will be slightly smaller. Candles will be used more sparingly. You contribute to these discussions, providing information about where expenses can be reduced with least harm to the household's functioning. It is delicate work. Savings must be found, but the castle must continue to operate effectively, and the household must be maintained at a level appropriate to Sir Edmund's status. The discussion reveals tensions within the household. Some argue for preserving their own departments while cutting others. Some resist any reductions that affect their areas of responsibility. Sir Edmund must mediate these disputes, making final decisions about what will be cut and what will be preserved. In the end, a plan is developed that spreads the reductions fairly widely, though not equally. Everyone will feel some impact, but no one area will be devastated. It is a compromise like most solutions to difficult problems, satisfying no one completely, but acceptable to all. As November arrives, winter begins to close in. The days grow short and cold. The first frosts come, killing the last of the garden plants and signaling the true end of the growing season. The castle draws inward, preparing for the months of cold and darkness ahead. The mood shifts as well. The outward-looking activity of summer and fall gives way to the inward focus of winter. People spend more time indoors, more time in close quarters with each other. The work changes too. Less agricultural labor, more indoor tasks like spinning, weaving, repair work, crafts that can be done by firelight. You find your work actually increases in winter. With people spending more time indoors, Sir Edmund has more time to devote to estate business. There are more meetings, more discussions, more decisions that require documentation. You draft more letters, update more records, produce more reports. Winter is also the season for education. Sir Edmund's sons have more time for their lessons and you spend more hours teaching them. They are progressing well. The older boy can now read simple Latin texts with minimal help, and both can write clearly if slowly. You find satisfaction in watching their development, in seeing them master skills that will serve them throughout their lives. The castle also receives more visitors in winter, paradoxically. Nobles and their households who travel between their various estates, staying at different properties for weeks or months at a time. These visitors bring news from other regions, entertainment, opportunities for social interaction that relieve the tedium of winter. One such visitor is Sir Edmund's younger brother Thomas, a landless knight who makes his living through service to greater lords. He arrives in late November with a small retinue and plans to stay through Christmas. His arrival changes the dynamics of the household. He is close to Sir Edmund in rank, which means he must be accommodated in the keep rather than the hall, and his presence requires adjustments to sleeping arrangements and meals. Thomas is an interesting figure, worldly, well-traveled, full of stories from court and campaign. He has fought in France and traveled to Rome. He speaks French fluently and knows some Italian. He has seen things and known people far beyond the experience of most of the household. In the evenings, Thomas holds court in the great hall, telling stories of his adventures. He describes battles he has fought, tournaments he has competed in, the splendor of the royal court, the strangeness of foreign lands. Some of his stories are probably exaggerated, but all are entertaining. The household gathers to listen, grateful for the diversion from winter's monotony. You find yourself drawn into conversation with Thomas several times. He is curious about the estate's administration and asks intelligent questions about record-keeping, finances, and management. He seems to understand that successful lordship requires not just martial prowess, but also careful administration, a lesson some nobles never learn. "My brother is fortunate to have competent officers," Thomas says to you one evening. "I've seen estates ruined by poor management, by lords who trust the wrong people or fail to maintain proper records. You provide a valuable service. The praise pleases you, though you try not to show it too obviously. I do my duty, sir, as we all must." "Duty well done is rare enough to deserve recognition," Thomas replies. December brings preparations for Christmas, the other great festival of the Christian year. Like Easter, Christmas requires extensive preparation, special foods, decoration of the chapel, arrangements for charity to the poor, planning for entertainment and celebration. The 12 days of Christmas, from December 25 to January 6th, are a period when normal work largely ceases. The household celebrates with feasting, games, music, and religious observance. It is a time of joy and excess, a deliberate counterpoint to the austerity of the rest of winter. You participate in all of it, the religious services, the feasting, the entertainment. On Christmas Day itself, after the morning mass, Sir Edmund hosts a great feast. The high table is laden with roasted meats, pies, puddings, sweetmeats. Musicians play throughout the meal. A troupe of players performs a religious drama depicting the Nativity. During the cleaning, you discover an old account book from 20 years ago, before the pestilence. Curious, you spend an evening reading through it. The differences from current records are striking. The household was much larger then, nearly twice its current size. Expenses were higher in absolute terms, but lower per person. There were positions that no longer exist, additional clerks, more servants, specialized roles that have been eliminated or consolidated. The old record is a window into a world that no longer exists, a world of greater abundance and population. You find it melancholy, this evidence of what was lost. But you also recognize that the castle has adapted, that it continues to function even with fewer people, that life goes on despite the changes. Spring brings an increase in activity beyond the castle walls. With the roads now passable after winter, travelers become more common. Merchants arrive with goods to sell, spices, fine cloth, tools, luxury items. Pilgrims pass through on their way to shrines. Itinerant workers seek employment. Masons, carpenters, blacksmiths with specialized skills that the castle's permanent staff may lack. Each arrival requires decisions. Will the castle purchase the merchant's goods? Will the traveler be offered hospitality? Will the worker be hired? These decisions often involve you, as you must record purchases and payments, or draft contracts for employment, or note in the household records who has been given food and shelter. One merchant who arrives in May catches your attention. He is a man called Nicholas, originally from Italy, but now based in London, who travels extensively trading in books and manuscripts. He carries with him several volumes, religious texts mostly, but also some classical works, and even a volume of poetry in French. You examine his wares with interest. Books are rare and expensive, each one copied by hand, each one representing hundreds of hours of labor. The castle's library is small, perhaps 30 volumes, mostly religious texts and practical works on estate management, medicine, and law. A new edition would be valuable. Nicholas notes your interest. You are a man of learning, he says in English accented with Italian rhythms. Can you read Latin? I can, and French as well, though my French is imperfect. Then perhaps this would interest you. He shows you a small volume, a collection of Aesop's fables in Latin with commentary. The manuscript is beautifully made, with decorated initials and wide margins. The price he quotes is substantial, more than a skilled craftsman might earn in 2 months. You know Sir Edmund will balk at such a cost. Books are luxury items, and Sir Edmund is practical in his expenditures. But you mentioned the volume to him anyway, describing its contents and condition. To your surprise, he considers the purchase. My sons should learn from such texts, he says. Sir Edmund has 2 young sons from his second marriage, boys of 7 and 9 years. They are being educated by Father Oswald, learning to read Latin and basic grammar. Fables teach virtue through example. The price is high, but if the book is well made, it will serve for generations. So the purchase is made, and you have the pleasure of adding a new volume to the castle library. You spend an evening examining it closely, reading the fables you remember from your own education, admiring the scribe's careful hand and the artist's decorated letters. It is a reminder that even in this world of daily labor and practical concerns, there is room for beauty and learning. May proceeds with its own rhythms. The castle's sheep are sheared, producing wool that will be sold or processed into cloth. The fish ponds are partially drained and harvested, providing fresh fish for the household, and extra to sell at market. The fields surrounding the castle show the green of growing crops: wheat, barley, oats, beans. If the weather cooperates, the harvest should be good. But weather is always uncertain, and agriculture is always a gamble. Too much rain can rot crops, too little can wither them. Late frosts can kill young plants. Diseases can sweep through fields, destroying the harvest. Everyone watches the sky, prays for good weather, and hopes for the best. Your work continues with its usual mixture of routine and variety. You update the account books daily. You draft letters as needed, to the Earl of Northwood about estate business, to merchants about purchases, to other lords about various matters. You assist Hugh the steward with planning and record-keeping. You teach basic literacy to Sir Edmund's sons twice a week, an assignment you find rewarding, despite the challenges of teaching restless boys who would rather be practicing with wooden swords than conjugating Latin verbs. In mid-May, a case comes before Sir Edmund in his capacity as Lord of the Manor, and you are called to attend and take notes. The case involves a dispute between 2 tenants over the boundary between their holdings. Each claims the other has been farming land that belongs to him. Each produces witnesses who support his claim. Sir Edmund hears both sides patiently, asking questions, examining the evidence. The dispute cannot be resolved by reference to written records. The boundaries were established by custom and oral tradition, not by formal survey. Eventually, Sir Edmund proposes a compromise. The disputed strip will be divided between them, each receiving half. Neither party is entirely satisfied, but both accept the judgment. You record the decision in the manorial court rolls, noting the names of the parties, the nature of the dispute, and the resolution. These rolls serve as precedent for future cases and as evidence if the dispute is reopened. Your written record transforms Sir Edmund's spoken judgment into something permanent and binding. As May ends and June begins, the castle prepares for the summer season. The weather is now consistently warm, even hot on some days. The stone walls that made the castle so cold in winter now provide welcome coolness during midday heat. Windows that were shuttered against winter winds now stand open, allowing breezes to flow through. The household's schedule adjusts to the heat. Work that requires physical labor, repairs, construction, heavy cleaning, is done in the early morning and late afternoon, avoiding the hottest hours of midday. The dinner hour shifts slightly later, allowing people to work through the cooler morning. Supper becomes more important as a substantial evening meal, since people are hungrier after working in the heat. June brings the first hay harvest. The meadows around the castle are cut, and the grass is left to dry in the sun before being gathered and stored in the castle's barns. This hay will feed the horses and cattle through the next winter. The work is labor-intensive, requiring many workers, so peasants from the villages come to fulfill their labor obligations to the Lord. You watch the hay harvest from the castle walls, observing the rhythms of agricultural labor, the steady swing of scythes cutting through grass, the workers moving in lines across the meadow, the wagons hauling hay to the barns. It is work you have never done and could not do. You lack the strength and skill, but you appreciate its importance. Without the hay harvest, without the labor of these peasants, the castle could not function. Your own work continues indoors, insulated from the physical demands of agriculture, but connected to it through record keeping. You note in the accounts which villages have sent workers, which tenants have fulfilled their obligations, which tasks have been completed. You calculate the amount of hay gathered and estimate whether it will be sufficient for the winter. In late June, the castle receives news that troubles everyone. There has been an outbreak of pestilence in a town 50 miles away. Several dozen people have died, and the town has quarantined itself, allowing no one to enter or leave. The news spreads fear through the household. Everyone remembers the great mortality, either from personal experience or from the stories they have heard. The thought that it might return is terrifying. Sir Edmund takes precautions. He orders that no travelers from the direction of the infected town should be admitted to the castle. He instructs the gatekeepers to question everyone seeking entry about where they have been and whether they have had contact with the sick. He arranges for additional prayers to be said in the chapel, asking God's protection. The ale and wine flow freely, and even you, normally moderate in your drinking, find yourself slightly intoxicated. The warmth of the fire, the abundance of food, the music and laughter, it all creates an atmosphere of celebration and community. For a few hours, the hardships of medieval life recede, and there is only joy. But the celebration cannot last forever. The 12 days of Christmas end, and January brings a return to normal routine. Indeed, January and February are perhaps the hardest months of the year. The excitement of Christmas is past. The stored foods are running low. The cold is at its worst, and spring seems impossibly distant. The castle settles into the endurance that characterizes deep winter. People do their work, maintain their routines, and wait for the season to pass. Illnesses circulate through the household, coughs and fevers that spread quickly in the close quarters. Several people fall seriously ill, and one elderly servant dies, a reminder of winter's dangers. You continue your work, though the cold makes it increasingly difficult. Your chamber is barely heated by the small brazier, and your fingers grow stiff, making writing painful. You take to warming your hands at the brazier between bouts of writing, though this slows your work considerably. In February, supplies begin to run short. The stored foods from autumn are depleting faster than expected, perhaps because the household has been larger than anticipated with various visitors, or perhaps because the calculations were too optimistic. Rationing becomes necessary. Portions at meals grow smaller. Less expensive ingredients replace more costly ones. The quality and quantity of food declines noticeably. The mood in the castle darkens with the shortages. Hungry people are irritable people. Minor disputes escalate. Tempers fray. Sir Edmund must intervene more frequently to maintain order, and he is not always patient in his interventions. You work with Hugh the steward to identify what additional supplies can be purchased to supplement the stores. Some grain can be bought from tenants who have surplus. Some preserved fish can be acquired from the coast, but purchases are expensive at this time of year, when supplies are generally short and prices are high. The situation is not desperate. No one is starving, and there is no immediate danger, but it is uncomfortable and worrying. Everyone looks forward to spring to fresh foods, to the end of winter's privations. March finally arrives, bringing the first hints of spring. The days lengthen. The worst cold begins to ease. The first brave shoots of green appear in the castle gardens. The mood in the household lifts perceptibly as people sense winter's grip loosening. And then, as March progresses, you realize that a full year has passed since our story began. You have lived through the complete cycle of seasons, experienced the rhythms of castle life, through all their variations, the cold and darkness of winter, the awakening of spring, the abundance and activity of summer, the harvest and preparation of autumn. Looking back over the year, you reflect on what you have learned and experienced. You have seen how the castle functions as a complex social and economic organism, how dozens of people must coordinate their efforts to maintain this small stronghold of civilization. You have witnessed the hierarchies and relationships that structure medieval society, the obligations and dependencies that bind lord and servant, noble and peasant. You have also experienced the fundamental insecurity of medieval life, the threat of disease, the dependence on harvest, the vulnerability to violence and disorder, the absence of many comforts and securities that later ages will take for granted. Life in the castle is better than life in a peasant cottage, but it is still hard, uncertain, and often uncomfortable. Yet you have also seen sources of meaning and satisfaction. There is the satisfaction of work well done, of skills competently exercised. There is the comfort of routine and tradition, of knowing your place and your duties. There is the security of community, of belonging to something larger than yourself. There is the beauty of religious ritual, the joy of festivals, the pleasure of occasional leisure and entertainment. And there is the simple fact of survival, that you have lived through another year, that you continue to work and eat and sleep and participate in the ongoing life of the community. In a world where death is always near, where catastrophe can strike at any time, mere survival is an achievement worth noting. The castle will continue its cycles. Next year will bring another round of seasons, another series of challenges and celebrations. Some people now in the household will be gone, dead or departed to seek fortune elsewhere. Others will arrive, new servants, new visitors, perhaps new children born to expand the community. But the fundamental patterns will remain. The bells will ring for prayers, meals will be served in the great hall, fields will be planted and harvested, records will be kept, justice will be administered. The work of maintaining civilization in a challenging world will continue. This is the essence of castle life. Not the dramatic events of warfare or great ceremonies, but the daily round of ordinary tasks performed by ordinary people. It is the cook preparing meals, the smith repairing tools, the servant cleaning chambers, the clerk keeping records. It is the routine made possible by organization and cooperation, the accumulation of small efforts that together create something larger and more enduring than any individual. As spring advances and a new year begins, you return to your chamber to update the account books with the first transactions of the new season. The work is familiar, comfortable. You settle at your desk, prepare your quill, open the ledger to a fresh page. The castle is waking around you. Voices in the bailey, activity in the great hall, the routine morning bustle of 80 people beginning their day. From your window, you can see across the castle walls to the countryside beyond, where spring is transforming the landscape from brown to green,